afternoon, everyone. Oh, I see everyone turned around to pay attention to the stage. And welcome, everyone, to the 2013 Public Policy Luncheon. I'm Sandy Magnus, AIAA Executive Director, and we are very excited to provide this opportunity and this meeting place where ideas can be exchanged among members, industry, government, and academia. And I think you'll all agree with me when you look at the really great program that our community put together for Science and Technology 2014, that we're not only starting the year off with a bang, but we're starting the new event model forums off with a really great kickoff. So I think let's take a moment and give a round of applause to all the people who put our program together. Thank you so much. And in that vein, we have a wonderful lecture for you here today, and we'll begin that program in just a moment. But first, on behalf of AIAA, I would like to extend a very, very heartfelt thank you to Lockheed Martin for sponsoring this unique forum, where we're able to continue our networking, meet old friends, greet new friends, and share our experiences with industry and with academia and with government, and do all of these things that we love to do with our passion for the aerospace industry. Lockheed Martin is a sponsor not only for this lunch, but of course, as you know, a premier sponsor for the conference, and we really appreciate their generous leadership and continuing support of AIAA. I would like to now invite Mr. James Crocker, Vice President and General Manager of Lockheed Martin Space Systems Company, to the podium for a few remarks. Jim, the floor is yours. Oh, there you are.
Well, thank you, Sandy. And on behalf of Lockheed Martin, we're really delighted that we could sponsor the Durand lectureship and this lunch today. And personally, I'm delighted that this year's winner is someone we all know and respect in the industry, Scott Pace. Mike Griffin is going to introduce Scott in just a minute, and so I get the job of introducing Mike. And as all of you who know Mike know, Mike prefers few words in his introduction, but I'd just like to take a shot at doing this. I know that many of you have been privileged to work with Mike in his roles both at DOD and also at NASA as the administrator, but I'd just like to focus for a second on Mike's role with the AIAA. As all of you know, he's finishing his 2 years as the president of the AIAA, and as many of you remember, he actually had to postpone that because he was slated to take up that role before he was selected as the NASA administrator, and so now he's completing that role. I know all of you know that even though he's in his day job CEO of Schaefer Corporation, that basically his passion for AIAA and the role that he feels the institution should serve as the organization that represents us as a professional society for our industry is really so important. If you were here this morning and you saw the film that AIAA put together, I know that Mike said that he was not responsible for the artistic nature of that film, which I thought was pretty awesome, but I'm sure that he guided it in its statement and statement of purpose of the AIAA. And it really, I think, highlighted the importance of this organization, what it means to our industry, but more importantly, what it means to our nation and what it means for our profession in the world. So as Mike comes up to the podium today, I would ask that you give him a round of applause to personally thank him for the dedication he's had to the AIAA and to our profession. So, Mike Griffin.
That was way too nice. When I leave in May, they're not going to say such nice things about me. No, thank you very much, Jim. That was extraordinarily kind. For my part, as I said this morning, for those who might not have been here, I am truly honored to be the president of this institute. It's an institute that's had my membership for 40 years, and I'm honored to be its president. I'm honored to be a member of this profession. The aerospace profession is the one that captured me as it captured all of us here, and really there was just nothing else I ever wanted to do. Another person who is in that vein is our honoree today, and some nice remarks were provided. I think I can make up my own nice remarks about Scott Pace, but I'm not an expert on the Durand lectureship, and so I'll speak to that for a moment from the script here. Probably many of us have forgotten, if we ever knew, that the Durand Lectureship for Public Service emphasizes notable achievements by a scientific or technical leader whose contributions have led directly to the understanding and application of the science and technology of aeronautics and astronautics for the betterment of mankind. The lectureship itself, Dr. William Durand, U.S. naval officer and a mechanical engineer. He contributed significantly to the development of aircraft propellers and was the first civilian chair of the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, one of NASA's forerunner organizations. After receiving his PhD, Dr. Durand went on to teach at the Michigan State College, Cornell University, and Stanford University, teaching the latter school's first course in aeronautics, and the second offered by any school in the country. He helped to rebuild Stanford after the 1906 earthquake, and the Department of Aeronautical and Astronautical Engineering bears his name. A memorial there reads, his first professional assignment in 1880 on the USS Tennessee, a fully rigged wooden ship with auxiliary steam power. His last, 1942, to 1946, was as chairman of the National Aeronautical Commission for the Development of Jet Propulsion for Aircraft. I mean, if you think about it, what a life. I mean, what a life. Of course, for all of us here, our ultimate goal is to make our stories about rocketry and spacecraft sound as obsolete and as distant in time as wooden ships rigged for sail. I mean, our goal is to make those things look old and outmoded. But what a career Dr. Durand had. Now, today's distinguished speaker, the recipient of the Durand Lectureship Award, is the director of the Space Policy Institute and is a professor of practice in international affairs at the George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs. His research interests have included civil, commercial, and national space security policy and the management of technical innovation. From 2005 to 2008, Scott was the Associate Administrator for Program Analysis and Evaluation at NASA, where he provided objective studies and analyses in support of policy, program, and budgetary decisions by the NASA Administrator. That was me. He previously served as Chief Technologist for Space Communications in NASA's Office of Space Ops, where he was responsible for issues related to space-based information systems. Scott participated in negotiations that resulted in the 2004 GPS Galileo agreement between the U.S. and the European Commission, and he was also a former Deputy Chief of Staff at NASA. Earlier in his career, Scott was Assistant Director for Space and Aeronautics in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where he was responsible for space and aviation-related issues and coordination of civil and commercial space issues through the Space Policy Coordinating Committee of the National Security Council. Between 1993 and 2000, Scott worked for RAND Corporation's Science and Technology Policy Institute and was a key member of a successful international effort to preserve radio navigation satellite spectrum. Scott, I think you're going to have a little bit more work to do in that arena before you're done. He was also a member of the Department of Defense Senior Review Group on Commercial Remote Sensing and the NRC Committee on Earth Sciences. I'm going to skip some of this earlier material and get to some of the things I want to say. When I instituted at NASA the Office of Program Analysis and Evaluation, because I believe that independent objective analysis is necessary in making key decisions at the top level of an organization, in a press conference announcing the new office at NASA and the person who was going to head it, I said that Scott Pace's brain should be regarded as a national trust. Scott and I have been friends for many years, colleagues for many, many years, and I still feel that same way. I am known to hold the opinion that policy analysis in our world should be done by those people who are technically qualified to do it. That policy analysis without the underlying technical understanding is at best non-value added and at worst incredibly harmful. Scott bridges both those worlds. He has a bachelor's degree in physics from Harvey Mudd, a master's in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT, another master's from MIT in technology and policy, and a doctorate from Rand in science and technology policy. I know of no one in our industry who so completely and comprehensively bridges the gap between technology and policy. I know of no one who does that better than Scott Pace. His contributions to everything from human spaceflight to GPS to aeronautics policy are well known, and I believe make him an ideal recipient of the Durand Lectureship. Scott, if you would come up and talk to us. While Scott's walking up here, the title of his talk will be American Space Strategy: Choose to Steer, Not to Drift. Scott?
Thank you, Mike. That's an embarrassing act to follow. Very, very kind words. And I think, as my physics instructors would have sensed, I've fallen from grace ever since I got into all this policy business. But I think, as Mike pointed out, there is a need to be able to bridge policy and technology, and I really commend AIAA for having this lectureship and for including history and policy and other issues as really part of what AIAA is about. I've been an AIAA member since I was an undergraduate, and I'm very grateful to AIAA for inviting me to be here today. As was mentioned, Dr. Durand, the first civilian chair of NACA, had a remarkable career. He was born just before the Civil War in 1859 and died in 1958 as the first artificial satellites orbited the Earth. The distinction of teaching the first aeronautics course at Stanford was, of course, it was the second aeronautics course in the nation after the one offered at MIT. Some rivalries are still with us today. American space strategy today. What I'd like to talk to you in that regard is really the choices before us. We all know that space activities today play a critical role in U.S. national security, economic growth, scientific achievements. Satellite communications link the world. GPS is an integral part of multiple critical infrastructures and enables functions ranging from survey and construction to farming, finance, air traffic management, not to mention U.S. military forces worldwide. Less understood is GPS's time signal provides a global time base for encrypted communications, including point-of-sale transactions. And without GPS, much of today's economy would come to a halt. We have rovers on the surface of Mars, a probe that has left the solar system. The International Space Station, continually manned, represents a unique collaborative partnership between the United States, Europe, Canada, Japan, and Russia. Spacefaring states are increasingly concerned with the long-term sustainability and security of space activities as a result of orbital debris and the proliferation of space capabilities to new national entrants, some of them potential adversaries. So while space today touches every aspect of modern life, what I want to focus on is human space exploration. It's the topic that's really in the future that's in most doubt today. This is unfortunate because human space activities are among the most interdisciplinary of enterprises, requiring skills from every field of technical endeavor. Their successful accomplishment requires a degree of systems engineering skill found only in the most complex and demanding programs. The ability and willingness to lead such endeavors conveys much about the nature and intentions of society. Thus, human spaceflight continues to possess great symbolic value, both domestically and internationally, and it's a matter of considerable interest to policymakers, and it should be. It's my argument that space cooperation, space commerce, international space security discussions could be used to reinforce each other in ways that would advance U.S. national interests in sustainability and security of all space activities. At present, however, these activities are largely conducted on their individual merits and not really as part of an integrated national strategy, and I'll return to this point later. This has been a busy month for discussing space plans. The International Space Exploration Forum concluded just a few days ago here in Washington. The ISEF brought together not only technical but also political representatives of the major spacefaring nations. It was the United States' turn to host this meeting, which built on a process started by the European Union at a meeting they hosted in Italy in 2011. ISEF is a forum for informal policy discussions and to build support for global cooperation in space exploration, a topic of special importance in today's fiscal environment. ISEF discussions benefited from years of technical work by the International Space Exploration Coordination Group, ISIG, a coordination mechanism among the major space agencies created in response to the vision for space exploration. The ISIG most recently succeeded in combining previously separate moon-first, asteroid-first approaches for going to Mars and into a single scenario where cislunar space is the next step for human exploration beyond low Earth orbit. This is a major accomplishment in that it's been the inconstancy of U.S. policy choices that have made attaining that kind of international consensus so difficult in recent years, and so the ISIG should be commended. The central elements of the U.S. approach toward human spaceflight can be found in the 2010 National Space Policy, in which the NASA administrators shall, quote, set far-reaching exploration milestones, by 2025 begin crewed missions beyond the moon, including sending humans to an asteroid. This declaration came as a bit of a surprise to both domestic and international space communities, following as it did upon the heels of two prior congressional authorization acts in 2005 and 2008, in which a human return to the moon was specifically set forth as the next focus for U.S. space exploration. The international community in particular, which had been shifting attention to the moon as a completion of the International Space Station drew near, felt a bit blindsided. Countries in Asia, Japan, India, China, South Korea saw the moon as a challenging but feasible destination for their robotic exploration and a practical focus for human exploration, a goal offering missions that they could reasonably expect to play a part. The lack of U.S. support during the present administration for a program to return to the moon made it difficult for advocates of human space exploration in Europe, Japan, and India and elsewhere to gain funding for any efforts beyond the ISS. Now, while the United States continues to be officially uninterested in human return to the moon, it's really the next target for most all potential international partners. Russia has made several presentations at various international conferences endorsing such missions. China has not made an official decision to send humans to the moon, but it's proceeding with a steady robotic program that is putting in place the technical pieces necessary to conduct more ambitious efforts in the future. Just last month, they placed a nuclear-powered rover on the moon, and last October they unveiled designs for a Saturn V class heavy-lift launch vehicle. Growing space powers such as Korea and India have their own unmanned lunar ambitions, and even the private sector is looking to explorations of the lunar surface as well as asteroid resources. Europe is taking a more cautious approach to human missions to deep space. They would likely join in a U.S. effort, but would not lead one without us. Unfortunately, there is no real U.S. plan or intent for human space exploration beyond the ISS, as there is no longer any real funding or defined architecture for such endeavors. There is, however, a clear policy to create U.S. providers of cargo and crew services to low Earth orbit to replace government capabilities. And using the ISS as an early market, the hope is the new providers can provide lower cost services to meet government needs and to be able to compete for non-government payloads, stimulate new demand and lower prices, and thus contribute to U.S. economic growth. The recent successful launches by SpaceX of telecom satellites, I think, are evidence of that policy. Cargo capability has been demonstrated. Crew capabilities are a work in progress. Now, there are risks to the current U.S. approach to human spaceflight. The U.S. finds itself reliant on the economic success of private sector providers, and though through intergovernmental agreements pertaining to the International Space Station, our partners now share this reliance. The companies themselves are also at risk. Should there be, as we say, a bad day on the space station, this would not only be a disaster for NASA and its partners, but would also put an end to the near-term market for commercial crew and cargo companies. It would be very difficult, in my opinion, to restart a U.S. human spaceflight effort without the pull of the ISS partnerships or the follow-on goal of lunar return, as it's unlikely that private firms alone at this stage would be able to recreate a human spaceflight capability without government demand, at least in the near term. Even assuming no accidents to the space station, it will likely be impossible to operate the facility beyond 2028 due to limitations in the crucial infrastructure elements. Now, political commitments have been made by the U.S., particularly the 2024 extension, which I think are very important and should be welcomed by all the partners. Without such commitment, it would be difficult and to justify scientific investigators to invest years of their career in carrying out experiments which might fly once, if at all, before the facility is closed. And despite the promise of space tourism, it's also unlikely the market will be large enough and stable enough by 2020 to replace the demand for human spaceflight now generated by the ISS. So again, the 2024 extension, I think, is quite a good thing. Human space exploration and human spaceflight for the next decade will continue to be driven by U.S. space policy as reflected in the NASA budget. And now this budget itself is a political choice. It's a reflection of what we value as a society. Now, to the question of affordability, it should be understood that in constant dollar terms, the administration's stimulus program was greater than the NASA's budget cumulatively from 1958 to 2008. The United States sent humans to the moon, built and operated a space shuttle fleet for 30 years, explored the solar system, and contributed its share of the International Space Station for less than the cost of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. This is a rich country, but it has priorities. That being said, the fiscal limits are real and increasingly harsh. The performance requirements for getting humans safely to other worlds remains constant and demanding. As budgets are pushed down, schedules slip, risks increase. We cannot, however, focus solely on cutting costs, as funds spent on any space activity have to compete successfully against other budgetary demands. If we are going to sustain discretionary expenditures for civil space exploration, we must develop a clearer rationale. We must work on the value proposition, if you will, linking such effort to national interest. They become supported in a bipartisan manner over many years. Now, there's no shortage of exciting and challenging human spaceflight ideas. NASA has proposed an asteroid redirect mission. While facing many uncertainties, it's nevertheless more practical than sending humans to an asteroid many months from Earth. The private sector is also creative, with programs such as the Inspiration Mars that show what could be technically feasible within really a very few years. Unfortunately, these proposals also share a common vulnerability. They lack any national policy content beyond the missions themselves. Assuming they were to be accomplished successfully, a big assumption, what would come next? There is no answer, and thus both these potentially interesting individual missions are examples of the weakness of the current capability-driven approach to human spaceflight, in that impressive machines are built without a motivating rationale beyond their own existence. This does not mean the missions are bad ideas. It simply means that in the absence of a larger strategic content for human spaceflight programs, they are insufficient by themselves to justify the infrastructure they require. Now, like many proponents of human space exploration, I was inspired by the imaginary voyages of science fiction and the reality of Apollo. In the 1960s, the film 2001: A Space Odyssey did not seem all that different, given the then current pace of events in space. And among the striking imagery conveyed to us by Kubrick and Clark was a giant space station and a base in the lunar crater Clavius, set in the mountainous southern highlands. The technical beauty of these facilities was certainly inspiring by itself, But there were many more subtle layers to appreciate. The wing transport from Earth to the space station was operated by a private company, Pan Am, and complete with flight attendants. At the height of the Cold War, the space station, envisioned for 2001, housed international visitors, including Russians, along with private facilities such as the Hilton and the Howard Johnson's. Our future in space would be international. It would include, but not be limited, to government organizations. The end of Apollo and the diminished hopes for the so-called von Braun paradigm led to the creation of a new approach, Gerard O'Neill's vision of space colonies. Rather than being dependent on continued government funding, his ideas were to create large, self-sustaining communities in space using non-terrestrial materials and the manufacture of solar power satellites to supply energy to the Earth. International, commercial, and government interests would be combined to meet tangible needs for energy and resources while providing a rationale for realizing the dreams of space enthusiasts. Heroic expeditions by a small number of government employees were replaced by an image of a community of tens of thousands of people living and working in space. The O'Neill vision was not practical due to the high cost of space access and the relatively low cost of traditional energy resources. Nonetheless, the vision was powerful in suggesting non-political reasons for human space activities such as economic growth and individual desires for creating new communities. This vision sparked related efforts in space industrialization and space tourism, which are still with us today. There's even renewed interest in solar power satellites, despite, in my view, unchanged economic fundamentals, in the space programs of China and India. Presumably, they too are looking for non-symbolic rationales for their own human spaceflight programs. We now have a $100 billion plus international facility in orbit and no plans for replacing it. Private capabilities now in development do not require technical breakthroughs, but they do require government funding, and the government has no alternatives if they fail. And with all due respect to Gene Kranz and the experience of Apollo 13, failure is always an option. And it's only by confronting the risks and the proximate root causes of failure I think that we achieve mission success. There's nothing inevitable about U.S. leadership in space unless we, in fact, make it so. I attended the International Congress, Astronautical Congress in Beijing last year with Sandy and many others from AIAA. And as might be expected, U.S., Russian, Indian attendance was rather light. The Chinese did a very, very good job of hosting the conference, really a commendable job. There were welcoming remarks by Li Wanchao, the Vice President of the People's Republic of China, and a display of the three-man Shenzhou capsule. There are also displays of Brazilian, Ukrainian, South African cooperative programs with China, and one could easily see what a global space community might look like without the United States. It was, in effect, a picture of a post-American space world with a full range of manned and unmanned space activities, but without American leadership or, in even many cases, American presence. China is planning to deploy its own space station in less than a decade, about the same time the International Space Station may be ending. If China is able to offer pragmatic opportunities for space cooperation on its own space station, or as part of efforts to send humans to the moon, and the U.S. cannot, then other countries will likely find it attractive to forge closer relationships with China. Such a shift in international space influence away from the United States and toward China will no doubt impact a wide range of U.S. national security and foreign policy interests, both in space and in other areas. The United States, however, retains several advantages in space. We have decades of experience and close relationships with almost every spacefaring nation on a wide variety of projects. The entrepreneurial energy of private U.S. companies, both large and small, is a source of admiration and occasional puzzlement to the international space community. At the same time, a proud history and a nascent private industry cannot alone substitute for national and international leadership in space. Both international cooperation and private sector initiative are necessary aspects of any effective American strategy in space, but are not by themselves sufficient. A focused national strategy is also needed to provide a coherent context for both cooperative agreements and private ventures. Now, working in the School of International Affairs today, it's easy to see the importance, for me anyway, of cross-national functional issues, if you will, such as security, trade, development, and technology to U.S. foreign policy. Of particular importance are debates over areas beyond traditional definitions of sovereignty, such as the high seas, international airspace, polar regions, space, cyberspace. These are today's frontiers, and thus areas of potential conflict and cooperation among state and non-state entities that impact U.S. interests. As with past frontiers, it is those who show up, not those who stay home, who create the rules and establish the norms for a new area of human activity. Pascal Lamy, a former director of the World Trade Organization and someone with long experience in issues of global governance and the role of law in international context, he makes an analogy that I found interesting with states of matter, solid, liquid, and gaseous, in which sovereign states represent the solid elements of international order, international law and practice are in the gaseous state, and transnational organizations such as the European Union, European Space Agency, are in the liquid and fluid state. In a world in which space capabilities are increasingly global, no one state will be in a position to impose rules unilaterally for exploration and development of space. Similarly, the diversity of competing national interests in space make it unlikely that a single international space authority or even a new space treaty will emerge anytime soon. Thus, the task of the United States, if it wishes to influence how space is developed and utilized, is to create attractive projects and frameworks in which other nations choose to align themselves and their space activities with us as opposed to others. Just as the United States shaped the post-war world with a range of international institutions to protect its values, so we should look to the creation of a new liquid arrangements to advance our interests, values, and freedoms in space. Monsieur Lamy is also an advocate of the principle of subsidiarity, in which decisions are taken at the level in which they can be most effective, and not overburdening the international system with issues that are better left to be dealt with at regional, national, and local levels. The work of the ISIG is an example of this, in which national space plans are coordinated and aligned, and without the creation of international structure that would infringe on sovereignty. Similarly, the United States seeks to promote the adoption of voluntary guidelines, such as those dealing with orbital debris, in national law and regulation, rather than creating new international treaties. Our ability to convince other nations to do the same would be strengthened by the presence of ongoing cooperative projects in space. The United States is crucially reliant on space systems, and the future sustainability and governance of space activities is a key strategic interest for U.S. space exploration. With the capability-driven approach, with ambitious goals in the distance that are not well connected to national interests, notably in international relations, is a problem. If we are to have an effective American space strategy, we need to align our policies, programs, and budgets with enduring national interests. This means looking beyond individual missions and seeking to determine where humanity might have opportunities beyond the Earth, and what values will be part of that future. If you look at the history of what we've done with human spaceflight in the past, the United States undertook the Apollo program in the 1960s to beat the Soviet Union to the moon as part of a global competition for Cold War prestige. The Apollo-Soyuz program symbolized a brief period of detente in the 70s. The space station program was established in the 1980s in part to bring developing capabilities of Europe, Japan closer to the United States and to strengthen anti-Soviet alliances. Russia was invited to join a restructured International Space Station in the 1990s to symbolize a new post-Cold War, post-Soviet relationship with Russia. We have no shortages of geopolitical challenges today. In meeting those challenges, I would like to see the values that we value today, democracy, human rights, rule of law, free markets, to be also part of the space frontier. I'd like to close then with a line from George Bernard Shaw's Man and Superman. There's a scene in which the devil asks Don Juan, the protagonist, why he bothers learning about himself and his core motivations. Don Juan replies, quote, "Why, to be able to choose the line of greatest advantage instead of yielding to the direction of least resistance. And there you have our difference. To be in hell is to drift. To be in heaven is to steer. We need to have the confidence to make the most of the opportunities before us, not to take the line of least resistance, but rather to choose the course which offers the greatest advantage to our nation and our values." And thank you very much for your attention.
He was about to get away. He didn't realize I have to give him the award. I couldn't listen to that speech without thinking about the fact that when we were both at NASA this last time, about once a year or so, I would commit an outrageous public relations gaffe.
Once a year?
Some were surprised to think that it was not more, but it was about once a year that it really hit the high bar of a real gaffe. And for 2006, the gaffe was when I answered a reporter's question by offhandedly saying, well, yes, of course China will be on the moon before we are able to return. That one didn't die down for some time. You recall that? Scott probably recalls it because he comes into my office and says, what were you thinking? But it doesn't look so far-fetched now. So anyway, that was on just a superb lecture. Thank you for reminding us of the larger perspective of what our engineering means and does. Our engineering opens up new worlds, and the opening of those new worlds has consequences. So thank you. It is my privilege to give you a medal and a certificate. Now, for the same reason that I do not putt well, meaning lack of fine motor coordination, hanging these medals around someone's neck has always been a challenge for me. But I will try. There you are. It also comes with a lapel pin that should come also with small print that says, wear only with tuxedo. And then, my certificate. Oh, Jim, thank you. And your certificate for the Durand lectureship. So, Jim, if you would stand, Scott, between us. Okay, good. Again, thank you for a remarkable lecture, and Jim, on behalf of Lockheed Martin, I would like to thank you for sponsoring it. Much appreciated. Sandy?
And thank you, everyone, for attending the luncheon today, and enjoy the rest of your dessert if you haven't finished it yet, and please enjoy the rest of the forum of the week. There's a lot going on, and I think you'll have a really good time here. Thank you.